Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Michele Boldrin. Hello, Michele. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm great. So, Michele, today we're going to be talking about patents, and you and your co-author David Levine. Sometime I should have not have him on the show. Both of you wrote a book several years ago, "The Case Against Patents." But before we talk about that, Michele, please tell us what is intellectual property.
Well, intellectual property is a set of very large set of laws, regulation, international agreements, and so on. Let's call it a legal framework that regulates the use of intellectual products from symbols, sign, pieces of writing, movies, what we are doing right now, to the so-called set of inventions, where invention is extremely large and also extremely ambiguous. And what it does, to different extent, is to allow people that comply with a certain set of rules and requisites to monopolize the intellectual product. Funny enough, for example, it allows inventors of particular devices and so on to claim exclusive usage of these for a number of years, typically 20 or some number around plus or minus something around 20, depending on circumstances and countries. But for example, it tends to exclude most of what you would call academic invention, even if at the same time the text, the actual written text in which the, let's call it academic invention, it's a bit of a terrible term, but I can come up with something better, is protected, is covered by copyright. And typically what the average academic does, that I have done, with a few things I've written, is to release the property of what I've written to the company publishing it. So there is this, not that I care much, I doubt I would have made much money out of the few things I've written, but in general, intellectual property, for example, in the academic field, creates the following situation. Researchers write papers of whatever topic, from history to mathematics, to economics, biology, whatever you want, send the paper to an academic journal. The academic journal is typically owned by a publisher. In some profession, there are professional organizations that try to control and manage the major academic journal, but typically it's a commercial publisher. And the commercial publisher acquires the property of the written text once it is published, to the point that if the author of that text wants to use it, for example, in her or his classroom, he has to ask for permission. So that's what intellectual property is in brief. Otherwise, I can go on for too long. Obviously, patents, that everybody knows what a patent is, are the main element in contemporary intellectual property.
What is a patent? Some people may know, some do not know. This show is like a university class.
Oh, I see. Well, a patent is an entitlement that the government gives through, in the case of the United States, through the US Patent Office. Other countries have similar agencies, to the people or the company or the entity that submit a proper application to the Patent Office, satisfy certain requisites and saying this gadget or this procedure or this object that I call with this name, it has the following characteristics. The following characteristic means theoretically the claimant or the applicant better at that stage is supposed to present enough evidence to the Patent Office to make the invention fully understandable and reproducible. Matter of fact, this is not the case, but let's not go there. After an investigation, which used to be serious and thorough. Now it's extremely quick and totally superficial because the sheer number of patent applications that are being submitted is such that it would be impossible to carefully examine each and every one. The patent is awarded if the applicant, if the application satisfies a number of requisites, which are originality, that is, somebody else has not patented something similar before or identical. It's of some value, social value or economic value, but better social value. And it's not obvious. It's not a triviality. It's not a complete triviality. Notoriously, one can show a counterexample to all three. But let me give you two of the most famous patents. One is how to swing a swing, and the other is how to make a peanut butter sandwich. But this is part of the folklore, obviously. So the patent is then awarded, and the owner of the patent has the exclusivity to that object for, as I said, about, it used to be 14 years at the outset, 2 centuries ago almost, in the United States. And now it's about 20 years, which is extendable to 25 and farther for pharmaceuticals. It should be said, given that it's the style is a university lecture, I didn't come prepared. I didn't think it was a university lecture, so I don't have any notes. I'm just going everything by memory. It should be said that at the outset, when modern patents were first introduced in a systematic way, which was in the United Kingdom at the beginning of the 18th century by the Statute of Monopolies by Queen Anne, there were example of patents in Italy, in Venice in particular, the city I come from, and other, but they were sporadical in centuries before. So the first systematic approach to patent and introduction of patents in the modern sense is in the United Kingdom, and then in the United States with the US Constitution that allows for a limited period of exclusivity. It was 14 years, and it was restricted to very few, how can I say, industrial invention. A lot of areas were completely exempt for patents. Just to give you an example, agriculture was all new seeds, new varieties of animals, new techniques, everything was essentially exempt from patent. There were no patents, was unpatentable until, if I recall correctly, the middle 60s of the previous century, that is in the 1960s. Only then agricultural invention, let's call them, became patentable. Software became patentable only in the 90s of the previous century, which means that all the main software that created the internet revolution in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s was not patented. For example, the notion of browser and the underlying code was not patented because it was not patentable at the time. This is one of the examples that I like to use to make people understand the impact of the patent may or may not have on subsequent innovation. What else to say? Well, I guess that's enough as an introduction to patents.
Yes, excellent introduction. And I said that it is like a university because I really insist that my listeners get access to the best quality information. I don't assume that they know, and even if they do know, their knowledge could be a bit erroneous. We don't know. So I like to promote factual information. That's why I said it's like a university.
Okay.
Yes, it's not, we're not very polemical on this show at all.
Okay.
Yes. So now, Michele, we can talk about your book, The Case Against Patents. Why are patents bad?
But okay, so the book is fairly old. It was
it is.
It was conceived, not that the underlying main messages are old, that the example may be old, and some of the facts have changed, mostly for the wars since. And one thing that I wish I was younger and more energetic and I had less passion for skiing and I should dedicate more time, is that in 2 decades, basically, that have gone that have passed since we conceived the book. It was published in 2006, not 2008, sorry. But I think it was, if I recall, we thought of it around 2005. The intellectual property has extended through a series of regulation and protection and other, how can I say, variation on the notion of patent, especially in the pharmaceutical, in an extremely complicated way, that makes concentrating only on patents and copyrights somewhat limited. And so the book has this limitation, especially when it addresses the medical pharmaceutical area, but also digital programming, computer industry in general. So in terms of example of factual evidence, it is old. In terms of concept, I don't think it is, because and in terms of fact, it's neither. What we do is to argue a very simple point from a theoretical point of view. Economic theory and social theory in general provides argument both in favor and against patents. One problem is in the public opinion seems to be aware only of the argument in favor, which is if you don't give the inventor some degree of monopoly, then it will have no incentive to invent, because the reward of the inventor comes through the monopoly profits. This argument, strictly speaking, is actually incorrect, even logically, as we and others have shown repeatedly, but it's very good propaganda. So I guess it's very useful too for those that support patents to have it circulate. A more serious argument of why patents may be there's almost no argument, I think, in economics to support copyright. Certainly no copyright of
We're going to get to copyright later, so just to continue to talk about patents. Later. Yes.
A more serious argument in favor of patents is that they allow for tradability of invention. They allow for the creation of a market for intellectual property in which creation and invention can be traded and moved to people that value it more. Now, there the evidence is that, in fact, you can actually trade intellectual product even without patent, that is, even without exclusivity, and in particular there's no reason to have an exclusivity the last 2 decades or more to trade. There is a second counter argument, but this is more subtle and I would leave it away, which is, in a world of very asymmetric information, it's not even obvious that I want to have a market for patents and intellectual property organized in that form, that is organized around the fact that there is a monopolist of the invention that precludes any other similar invention from entering the market and competing, which leads to the counter argument, that is that economic theory suggests, since the time of Marshall, that the way in which invention comes around is because they are a product of competition. Basically, people invent things that are economically useful because they try to outcompete their competitors, to do things better, either in terms of reducing cost, or producing a better quality product, or both of them, or just simply marketing it better, or painting it better, making it look better, or whatever. And to the extent that this is a creation of competition, in fact, an old observation by George Stigler that says, in the models, we represent competition as price-taking behavior. A matter of fact, that is the limit point, the arrival point, the consequence of competition. Actual competition in real world, in real time, it's that you and I try to run faster than the other one, or you and I and many others. Okay, and it is done, it is carried out by all this trickery. Let's call it trickery of invention, innovation, adoption, imitation. You do things a bit better than me, I imitate you, but then I discover another thing and you imitate me, and so on and so forth. And That was the old model of a competitive industry that Alfred Marshall had pointed out and got abandoned. So there are theoretical arguments on both sides. A priori, obviously I'm biased, but a priori one could say they're both somewhat sound, and therefore economic theory per se is mute. This is actually the approach we take in the book, even if one has to admit the book is written by two authors that are convinced that the arguments in favor of the theoretical argument in favor of patents are pretty weak. As I said, the main one is actually wrong. If you care, we can discuss it later. Why it's literally wrong as a matter of theory. And therefore, we actually instead think that the competitive argument is much more solid. At the time we wrote the book as a reaction of a dominant position in the profession that kept, and is still dominant, and I think it's completely wrong, that kept describing economic growth as the product of innovation. Yes, and on this we're all in agreement. Economic growth comes from technological change, which means innovation, adoption, imitation, innovation, adoption, all kind of levels, and from the smallest details, the plug, the form of the plug that is now connecting my PC to the power, to big things like, inventing the new messenger RNA technology. That's certainly what growth is, and it's all about innovation and their adoption. I agree, but the step following that was that this whole thing come from the existence of monopoly power awarded by patents, and in the absence of it, there would be no growth at all. That was the dominant position, still is. And the idea was even that there is no model of growth and innovation under condition of competition. So David and I felt that was incredibly wrong as a statement, and said, look, the model is there. It's the old Marshallian model. It may need to be updated and written in the fancy, elegant mathematics that is now, the standard in economic theory, but it's not that difficult to do, and we had done it for a few years, and it was very strange. The reception of the argument was very sympathetic among theorists, but obviously people involved with a specific topic defended their turf, and because we thought that the relevance of the point was more relevance of public policy, we wrote the book for that. And we wrote the book to point out that the argument against patents is not just theoretical, it's actually mostly empirical. Because the facts, while theoretically you can claim that it is monopoly power that create economic growth and innovation, de facto, this is not the case. So I guess you should ask me something, otherwise I go on forever. And
No,
tell
I know, I'm listening. I have many questions to ask. So, Michele, this question is crucial. Patents. Can innovation occur without intellectual property? This is a crucial question.
Almost all great innovation have occurred without intellectual property. That's the point. Everything you and I are using right now was in the bulk of what we're using was created in a time in which the, let's call it internet industry, okay, to include a bit of everything, was not allowed to patent. Nobody patented. Okay. Bill Gates himself admitted in the middle 90s when patents started to come around through judicial decisions, and so that allow for patenting of code and similar product in the again internet industry. Bill Gates the same says the industry would have never come around if there had been patent in the 70s, 80s, and until now, because we were copying each other like crazy and improving on each other like crazy. That's how the industry has come around. The green revolution has come without patents. the colonization of the United States and the adaptation of agricultural products, seeds, animal, and techniques to the very different soil and climates that one encounter as he moves through continental United States from the East Coast to the West Coast has come around without patent. The fashion industry keeps surviving without patent and doing very well, and so on. But in fact, in the book at the time, we went over and checked in the top medicine journals the list of the top medical invention of the century or the last 50 years. And the overwhelming majority of them, including drugs, techniques, had been invented without patents. That is, had never been patented. I mean, I can go on forever.
Yeah, and what about
in
the
fact, most industries that are now frontier industry, at the outset, when the major creative invention came around, okay, were not covered by patents. They all came around without patents. Patents were introduced in these industries only later on. Think of, for example, one example, chemical and pharmaceutical. Modern pharmaceutical is a German-Swiss product, and the Swiss constitution forbade patents until 1978. And the Germans did not have patents on product, only on processes, until I forgot when. I think it was us, after the occupation, that changed that, but I'm not sure about this. But certainly, they had no patents on chemical products or pharmaceutical products of any kind between the middle of the 19th century, when their chemical industry started to catch up with the rest of the world, that eventually surpassed it, and World War II. And in fact, the biggest spoil in some sense from the industrial point of view, from the point of view of the United States and the United Kingdom, of both the First and the Second World War, was the expropriation of the industrial secrets of the German chemical and pharmaceutical industry that were expropriated and transferred to our countries and to our companies.
I was just about to ask about the pharmaceutical sector in Europe, but you already answered the question. Yes, the pharmaceutical sector thrived without patents.
What, excuse me?
No, I was just about to ask you a question about the pharmaceutical sector in Europe, but you already answered it.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical sector in Europe was developed completely without patent. Italy also did not have pharmaceutical patents, until the late 70s, early 80s, and had a pretty thriving pharmaceutical industry. In the pharmaceutical case, it's patently clear, patently clear that patents hurt. People have now discovered it with the vaccine. And the funny thing about the vaccine is that the way they have discovered, because it was politically biased and interested, has been somewhat nonsensical, because they thought that removing patents, boom, overnight would have suddenly made vaccine production, 10 times or 2 times or 5 times what it was. That was obviously naive and silly, and showed that not understanding the argument against patents. The patents, there is no sense in which there is 1, 2, 3, 7 big patents that are obstructing or slowing down economic growth and innovation. You remove that and things become miraculous. No, the damage of patents is something that realizes itself over the very long run. The reason why in between December 2020 and January 2021 or February, there was no way by removing patents that one could have multiplied the production of vaccine. It was very simple. It was that 20, 30 years of patenting had prevented the creation of productive capacity by competitors, and had frustrated any tentative of imitation of a variety of technologies, not just the mRNA or the actual vaccine for COVID. And therefore, that was the problem. It restricts the growth of productive capacity. Productive capacity is a very complicated object. It's not just a bunch of chimneys with a big building, and where, it's a lot of people that know how to do things, and you don't learn how to do things if you're prevented from doing those things, as long as you don't belong to a certain company. It's capacity of treating certain materials, it's storing or producing materials, it's also machinery, certainly a procedure. But because patenting, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, but also in the computer, in the software industry, is a maze. You don't patent one single thing, you patent thousands of little pieces, tens of thousands. The restriction to growth happens very slowly. So there's no magic. That's why David and I actually took position in spring this year twice, wrote a couple of articles, one fairly long for the last issue of the Cato Journal, saying, look, obviously we think patents are damaging, and we think that patents in the pharmaceutical industry have certainly damaged our ability worldwide of producing vaccines against COVID, no doubt. But we are also not so naive to think that we now do some symbolic removal of this or the other patents because we want to punish Pfizer or Moderna or whoever you want to punish because they're the bad guys. And then suddenly we have vaccines for everybody. That's populism. That's not true. You want to use this to learn how to do something about the patent system in the pharmaceutical industry? Excellent. Let's start looking at the pieces and removing the pieces.
Yeah, so Michele, I read your piece published by Cato, and I also read your article published in the Economics Observatory. And in your article, you reference Moderna. Well, not Moderna per se, but someone who's affiliated with Moderna. And you write, what would the effect of a patent waiver be on competition? As far as Moderna is concerned, a patent waiver is irrelevant. On the 8th of October 2020, the company announced that while the pandemic continues, Moderna will not enforce our COVID-19 related patents against those making vaccines intended to combat the pandemic. As has become clear, non-enforcement of the patent has not led to a surge of generic Moderna vaccines into the market. Why not? According to Stephanie Bancel, Moderna's chief executive, there is no mRNA in manufacturing capacity in the world. This is a new technology. You cannot go hire people who know how to make the mRNA. Those people don't exist.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. This, I think, was the CEO or somebody with Moderna
Yes, Moderna.
that made that very clear.
Stephane Bancel, sorry, not Stephen, Stephane.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he just said blatantly the truth. That the restrict, as I repeat, the restriction to the accumulation, creation, and productive capacity that intellectual property generates. It's something that takes place slowly by millions, in some sense, of individual decision of doing or not doing certain thing, of learning or not learning something, of producing or not producing certain gadget and piece and parts here and there. And obviously, then you see the cumulative effect eventually, which is also why, even if actually data tend to show that there's absolutely no correlation between innovation and increase in TFP and technological change and monopolization of sectors, which is also why, in any case, it's difficult to use high-frequency data, even high-frequency data, to establish a causal connection between there is patenting here and therefore there is less innovation here a month later, 3 months later, a year later, right? Because the process, as I said, is very slow. And so you need to be able to reconstruct causal chains that are internal to the structure of the sector and are not apparent in simple data. But in any case, I mean, data, there is essentially no data showing the patents are good for innovation. There is some research led mostly by my friend Philippe Aguillon, who keeps insisting on creative distraction. And I'm very glad that after having been one of the, and I said it with intellectual respect, Philip is a great economist, but that after having led the charge in the early 90s of the what is now unfortunately considered the standard model, which is the following. There is a monopolist. The monopolist is there, is producing this thing, and then there's a bunch of guys on the back that are excluded from imitating the monopolist because there is the patent, okay? But they hope to get the next patent. So the monopolist has invention number 5. They're all looking for invention number 6. Strangely enough, the monopolist, there is a trick in the model, has no incentive to look for invention number 6, which instead is typically the truth. The monopolist has a lot of incentives to look not for invention number 6, for invention 5,01, because the monopolist likes to do it that way. Okay, so that there's always a new patent at every stage that makes it impossible to overtake it. But anyhow, in their story, the monopolist is not looking for the invention number 6. He's just happy with 5. There's a bunch of guys that are all competing for invention number 6 in the background, trying to invent 6. And the reason they want to invent 6 is because they're going to get monopoly power and the monopoly profit. Notice, these are not in the industry. That's the thing. So they're outside the industry. In the industry, there is just a monopolist. The monopolist is producing the PC, this PC. And the guys that are outside, they're not involved in producing the PC. They want to produce the super PC. And then one of them randomly wins and becomes, overtakes everything. He makes, or she makes the monopolist that controls number 5 disappear because 6 is better. So they disappear. And the story starts. And I always say, have you ever seen one single industry working like that? There is no industry working like that. I think Philip realized that. And so now his view in the data is trying to say, oh, that, yeah, but you still need a bit of monopoly power. So the optimal point is almost competition, but not really competition. Fine, you know. I'll be honest, Lipton, as a matter of political economy, if it is a little bit of monopoly and mostly competition, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, well,
as long as we start working down from 25 years to 7, I'm happy. You know, if patents go down to 5 years, which is a bit of monopoly, I sign it. Let me know where to sign, and I'll go and sign. And the same is for copyright. You know, if we go copyright for eternity to copyright 5 years, let me know where to sign. I'm perfectly happy. I'm not going to debate the quibble, but I find that entertaining because, as I said, there is not a single industry that I know that has ever behaved even remotely like that. We're still using the dominant word processor of 40 years ago. Bill Gates won the game, and nobody has ever overtaken them, ever. People still use Excel.
Interesting point in response to Philippi, but I'm a big fan of Philippi. I think he's a great economist.
Sure. I mean, as I say it with a lot of respect, but and it's not just Philip, actually. Philip is very dynamic and has been working on that. But anyhow, to the extent you understand that when you have a position that is considered strange, crazy, irrational, unrealistic, and you observe that there is instead other points of view that are seen as the appropriate one, you have to insist and point out a bit polemically that maybe that it's not so obvious. So I really ask, you know, where is the industry that has ever evolved by this leapfrogging?
Yes, recently the Cato Institute published a review of patents. This review was featured in 2019, and the conclusion is that from a cost-benefit analysis, the patent system is expensive. But the writers cited Edith Penrose, who herself years ago said that the patent system is expensive, but replacing it could also be problematic. What
could be problematic?
Replacing the patent system. Although the patent system is quite expensive, the market has gotten adjusted to the patent system. So replacing it could be quite expensive. But I think that private foundations could do a better job. And presently, I'm thinking about some other ideas.
Well, I'm not sure about that. So that topic, that specific topic, if you have our book in your hands, you can look at the end. There is a last chapter that we dedicated to policy, right? And we say exactly that. Exactly that. If that chapter starts from, I would say, a common sense consideration. No matter how much you might think that patents, intellectual property in general, right, are damaging for innovation and growth, they have been around for 2 centuries. And therefore, in some industries they've been around for 2 centuries, in others they've been around for 50 years, 40 years, 30 years, but still a substantial amount of time. There are very few industries in which patents are not used nowadays. And so you cannot even remotely think that the solution is to wake up one morning and say, abolish patents. The analogy we use is with trade restrictions. And I still think that the analogy is by far the most appropriate. First of all, because from an economic point of view, trade restriction and patents are the same thing, and intellectual property are the same thing. They're both trade restrictions. Intellectual property is a limitation of competition. It's a way of preventing imitation. It's a way of preventing competition. It's a way of preventing entry, and so on and so forth. So it is totally analogous to trade restriction that prevents products and companies working in country A to compete in the market of country B and vice versa.
Michele, so in if we do not have a patent system, I would suggest a platform for creators. Maybe it could already exist in other countries under a different name or different arrangement, but I think that my idea is fairly innovative, where innovators could simply just license their ideas, and it's already done, but I would create a platform where an innovator would advertise his product online to be licensed by one or multiple entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs could create their own schemes to maximize the potential of the product. That could be one strategy, allowing inventors who are interested in making money to earn.
Sure, I actually think that venture capital pretty much works like that. So in some sense, that is still there. But in order to have initiative or new markets of the type you're describing come around, you obviously need to change the dominant market to make the dominant market, which is the market for patents, less convenient and less profitable than it currently is. And that's where our analysis goes, which says you can do that only by imitating what has been done since World War II, since the end of World War II, to open up free trade. You have proceeded one trade agreement at a time by slowly removing things and announcing they will be removed and saying it in anticipation so that companies and industries could adapt and prepare for the liberalization. You need a similar process. You need, and that's why the intellectual battle is crucial. Let's not forget that at the end, free trade started to be implemented after World War II because an intellectual battle was won. Everybody had come to realize that the trade restriction introduced during the Great Depression and the interwar years and during the war were damaging, and there was a very strong argument in favor of free trade. But reality was against it. Everybody was lobbying against, and today everybody's lobbying against. So I guess there is still an intellectual battle to be fought, probably lost. This one seems to be particularly tough.
Now we can talk about copyright extensions, and on this matter, the evidence is just pellucid. Copyright extensions are more likely to slow and impede innovation than to induce the formation of new knowledge.
I suppose, yeah.
You don't need a copyright extension for 95 years.
Most definitely not. But again, you understand, copyright are a way, copyright more than patents have become a way of keeping alive some absolutely obsolete, inefficient, and in fact, parasitic industries.
Exactly.
In the case of music, the change of technological change has been so strong that it's kind of blown them off the ground in any case. But as you see, copyright as a way of hurting, again, right? YouTube, and that was born essentially against copyright, has become one of the biggest enforcers of copyright. Spotify has come to monopolize or near monopolized a large chunk of the music online industry, and copyright is still the instrument. It's still the instrument. So yeah, copyright is very damaging for cultural production. It's actually a very small part of GNP, by the way.
We
One
want
should say.
we want intellectual works to cultivate the public domain. So if I write a book, obviously I'm going to sell it and make some money, but it's more important for me to transform the world with my ideas. I think that this is the motivation behind writing. Writers want to make money. Who doesn't want to make money? But in the long term, people want to change society.
Sure, but even if you're not, I have less ambition. I used to think that we could change society. Then I did the reverse of what Marx claimed which philosophers should do. He had this famous phrase according to which philosophers until him had spent their time trying to understand the world, and now it was time to change it. During my life, I've gone in reverse. I started out as a teenager thinking that I could change the world, but I've come progressive to realize that even understanding it is complicated enough that changing it might be left for the future.
No, presently,
For
presently,
the
Michele,
post-retirement period. Right now, I'm still working on understanding it.
presently, Michele, I have a greater urge to earn than to change the world. I want to change the world, but in the long term, you really can't change people. You can only work on yourself.
Right, there is a good joke. The other day, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, a great scientist that was abused for a while, but has been brave enough and strong enough to continue doing research, has written incredibly interesting things. Some of them I even disagree, but they're still. Ed Wilson has died.
Oh,
And
Edward
he had
Wilson
this,
died?
yeah, I think Ed Wilson, the creator, so to speak, of social
Yeah,
biology.
I
I think he
didn't know.
died.
Let me look it up. When did he
I
die?
think
Like
he died
yesterday?
something like that. I think either
Wow.
yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah,
But it was
26. He died on Monday.
26. Okay, yeah, something like that. And so 26. Today is the 29th. Okay, that seems to make sense. And I don't know if you know, he had a beautiful joke that was something like, I don't remember where he wrote it, but I remember the joke because I thought he had nailed the problem. He said, Marx was right. His model works, and socialism per se works. The problem is that Marx got the wrong species.
Yes, I remember it. He died on Sunday. Yes, I remember that joke.
And so in the sense that there exists, or there might exist, or we can think of a species of humans, other than the currently existing humans, for which the theory of communism may actually be implementable, and as the economists would say, incentive compatible. They're not incentive compatible for this kind of humans, those available on Earth. So that's become my approach. Okay,
Okay, so before
but
we
we're
go,
going off the track now.
not a problem. This is a free flowing discussion. But before we go, you also wrote another piece titled Digital Platforms May Be Monopolistic Providers, but they are not infrastructure. And I agree 100%. We can survive without Facebook and social media. They're innovative, but only to a certain degree.
That's a big problem on which I think David and I actually have different opinions, if I am not wrong. But it's a bit, it's a bit of time we don't talk about it. So I don't know what his opinions are right now. I am very divided analytically about these dominant firms. On Amazon, I have little doubt. Amazon have been maybe starting longer than the other. For a long time, I've been teaching a class on innovation intellectual property, which has it's for junior and senior, mostly senior, and it comprises a research paper at the end, and they take care of different topics. But one topic I always push every year is to discuss why nobody imitated Amazon. Because you see, Amazon is not very much patent protected and was very little patent protected when it started out. Everybody forget that it started out really small. Yeah, it had the venture capitalists, a couple of bucks, but it was peanuts, no bananas, peanuts compared to even its competitors at the time. But after all, we're a small company like Barnes and Nobles and other book distributors, no big deal. And so the interesting thing with Amazon is that it never got imitated. That shows that sometimes things go wrong independently of patents. Patents didn't play a role there. So with Amazon, I have very little quarrel right now. You want to compete with Amazon, compete. Stop complaining that it's a monopolist. It's not a monopolist. Why didn't Walmart compete with Amazon? Why didn't Target compete with Amazon? And so on. Like Carrefour or whatever, or Sean. So that's one thing. Google is another. Each one of them is a different story. I mean, each one of them would require a specific investigation. I don't think intellectual property plays a big role in any of them other than Facebook, frankly.
And as you said in the beginning of your article, social media platforms are not infrastructure nor natural monopolies, and they should be regulated only if they have monopolistic power and abuse it.
Yeah, that's my view, frankly. Even if I understand that economics and economic analysis is not always and not necessarily the only criteria you have to use in public policy.
And I also like this snippet. Unplug Facebook or Twitter and the web works equally fine, which was hardly the case with AT&T. Amazon, Apple, and Google are neither platforms nor infrastructures, but multi-product firms supplying, among other things, important bits and pieces of the internet infrastructure, which could be substituted by other competitors without affecting the proper functioning of the internet as an infrastructure.
Absolutely, right. I don't think anybody has any doubt about that.
Yes, social media is overrated. The only reason why
I'm overrated as a business, not overrated.
I mean, as a business, it's not overrated. As an idea, it is.
I think that we overrate their impact. Okay, I think we overrate the dominance, the economic dominance. Okay, that's my view. They certainly have a huge influence. I have no doubt. The problem is that the influence is cultural, right? And Facebook has a gigantic influence through Instagram, through Facebook itself on human behavior. There's no doubt about it, right? It's very hard to say no. Yeah, well,
it does. And the influence is not always positive. There's a negative influence and a positive influence.
Yeah, exactly. But it has nothing to do with antitrust law.
Not at all.
It has nothing to do with breaking up Facebook. It has to do with something else.
Yeah, Facebook is a derivative innovation. Yeah.
Right. So we agree. And I don't feel like adding much more, even if I do understand that there is a social cultural problem around some of these platforms, Facebook in particular, and that this may push political agents to do things because, as I said, economics is not the only criteria we should use. And if you feel that, let's say, the center of information creation and diffusion, okay, has become too powerful and has become capable of conditioning the working of the democratic system, you may want to intervene. I don't think this is the case right now. So
And I agree. People
read me carefully. I'm not part of those that say, oh, Facebook is threatening democracy.
No, look, Michele, people have a choice. You can choose to consume inaccurate information on Facebook, or you can choose to read a reputable journal and vet the information for yourself. People have a choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, people have a choice. People choose to consume nonsense on Facebook. You can't blame Facebook for misinformation. Facebook is just a platform facilitating interactions. If people choose to abuse it, that is their problem, not the problem of Facebook.
Well, I mean, Facebook has to be more. I mean, what's the journal? I don't know if you followed their investigation on internal documents and
yes,
practices.
I've been following it.
Yeah, they're quite debatable. It has nothing to do with antitrust, obviously, again, but there is a number of issues there on the way they practice. But we're going outside my.
Yeah, it can be argued.
Yeah, on this matter, I don't
platform.
consider myself informed
Yeah.
capable enough of passing judgment.
Yeah.
I can just express concern and notice that there are things that are worth debating.
Some reports were saying that Facebook is politically biased, but then many platforms are biased. So this is not a new argument.
Yeah.
But Michele, I'm really enjoying the discussion, but these days I'm planning to do shorter shows. So unfortunately, I have to wrap up. So bye. It was a pleasure to speak to you, Michele.
No,
all right,
fine.
bye.
I think we talked long enough.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Thank
then,
you for
bye.
your interest.
Yeah.
Thanks. Take care.